I think this will be perfect for our anniversary, Sabrina said, her manicured fingers flipping open a glossy brochure. She laid it on the coffee table like it was a sacred text. Bold letters read Mediterranean Luxury Voyage, 21 days, all inclusive, and beneath them, a price tag, $55,000. I sat at the far end of the couch, my tea cooling in my hands, trying to ignore the way my stomach tightened. Evan was in his armchair, scrolling on his phone, not looking at either of us. Sabrina's voice had that high, bright tone she used when she thought the decision had already been made. It leaves from Venice, hits Greece, Turkey, Monaco, full suite, private balcony, personal butler, and we'll need business class flights. The works. She looked directly at me, her brown eyes sharp, expectant. So, you'll cover it, right? It'll be our 10-year anniversary gift from you. She said it as if she were asking me to pass the salt. I set my tea down. No, Sabrina, I'm not paying for your cruise. My voice was quiet but firm. The air in the room shifted, like before a summer storm. Her smile froze, the brochure crumpling slightly in her grip. Excuse me? The word came out low, dangerous. I met her gaze. I said no, I'm not gifting you a $55,000 vacation. Evan's phone stilled in his hands. His eyes flicked between us, like he was watching a match he already knew the winner of. Sabrina stood, unfolding her tall frame over me until her shadow swallowed the couch. I think you misunderstood. This isn't a request. We've already planned the dates. I understood perfectly. The answer is still no. The slap came so fast I didn't see her hand move, only felt the sharp, shocking sting across my cheek, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. Heat bloomed under my skin, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then find somewhere else to live, she shouted, her voice stripped of all the sugary politeness she wore in public. I'm tired of carrying a selfish old woman who won't even help her own family. I turned to Evan, waiting for him to step in, to tell her she'd crossed a line. But his gaze dropped to the floor. Slowly, he nodded, his voice flat. Maybe it's time you did move out, Mom. The words didn't sound real. Evan. And he cut me off. I'll squeeze every cent out of you if I have to. You owe us for everything we've done for you. My throat tightened, not with fear, but with a kind of hollow disbelief. This was my son. The boy I'd raised after his father died when he was 8. The boy I'd scraped and saved for, selling my travel agency so he could go to college without debt. I stared at him, the room tilting slightly. I've been paying you rent for 2 years, I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort. I help with groceries, the utilities, your car down payment. Sabrina's laugh cut through me like glass. Helped? You mean the measly $1,000 a month you chip in? Evan makes 6 figures. That's pocket change. Then why? I asked. Do you need my money for a cruise? Evan's eyes lifted to mine and I saw it. Resentment. Because we deserve it. We work hard. We've earned it. With my money? Money you're just hoarding, Sabrina snapped. What are you saving it for? You're 63, with no life, no friends. Let your family enjoy it. The words hit like a second slap, because part of them were true. I had grown isolated since moving in here. Sabrina had made sure of it. Every invitation from old friends met with a reason I couldn't go. Every attempt to host someone met with a reason they couldn't come. I'm saving it for emergencies, I said quietly. Evan crossed his arms. This is an emergency. Our marriage needs this trip. And if you can't support that, maybe you need to reevaluate what family means. I looked between them, their united front, their entitled certainty, and something cold settled in my chest. I see, I whispered. I stood, My legs unsteady, but my back straight. I'll pack my things. Sabrina's smirk returned, smug and certain she'd won. Evan stayed silent, eyes back on his phone. And in that moment, with the echo of her slap still burning my cheek and my own son's words still hanging in the air, I knew something with absolute clarity. I wasn't safe here anymore. Not in this house. Not with them. And whatever came next, I couldn't let it be on their terms. People like Evan and Sabrina never think the giving starts somewhere. They think it's just always been there, that you've always had your hand open, ready to drop money into theirs. But I remember the exact day it began. The day I signed the papers to sell Whitfield Travel, the agency I'd built from nothing after my husband died. It wasn't a big agency, just 3 desks, 2 part-time agents, and a book of loyal clients who trusted me to craft their dream vacations. It was my pride, my independence, and in some ways, my last connection to the life I'd had before everything changed. Evan came to me in that shaky, earnest way people do when they're about to ask for something huge. He had a business idea, an import venture, and he needed a loan from the bank, but the bank wouldn't give him the full amount. If I sold the agency, he could cover the gap and get started. "It's not just money, Mom," he'd said. "It's an investment in me, in our family's future." I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that seeing him succeed would be more satisfying than running the agency into my retirement years. The money went quickly, and the business stumbled within 18 months, but I told him it was fine. "It happens," I said. "You'll find another path." Then came the car. Sabrina had a taste for sleek things. Things that looked like success even if they weren't backed by it. She told me, point blank, that it would be embarrassing for Evan to keep driving his old hatchback now that he was networking with serious people. I bought them a late-model SUV, paid half up front so the payments would be manageable. Sabrina didn't thank me. She posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "Manifesting the life you deserve." People commented on how lucky she was. Not one of them knew I'd written the check. The down payment on their house was next. They'd found a 3-bedroom in a transitional neighborhood. Sabrina's words, not mine. They were just shy of the down payment, and I happened to have exactly what they needed in a savings account I'd been building for my own rainy day. She called it fate. I called it another compromise. That day, Evan hugged me so hard I thought maybe, just maybe, this time it would stick. That they'd see me not just as a resource but as a person. But as the years rolled on, those moments of gratitude got shorter, then disappeared altogether. Once I moved in with them, after my hip surgery made climbing the stairs in my apartment too difficult, Sabrina began a quiet campaign of control. She didn't forbid me from seeing friends. She didn't have to. She just made it inconvenient. Every time I had plans, there was a family thing that needed my attention. Or she'd insist she needed my help with the house that day. When I tried to host old friends for lunch, she'd forget to leave the kitchen tidy or occupy the living room so there was no space to gather. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. It's funny how quickly people disappear when you're no longer available. I told myself it was temporary, that living with them was a mutual arrangement. I paid $1,000 a month in rent, contributed to groceries, picked up the electric bill more often than not. I thought that would matter. But Sabrina always found a way to make it sound small. "Evan makes 6 figures," she'd say. "Your little contributions barely keep the lights on." She never mentioned that my measly 1,000 also freed them up for weekend getaways and expensive dinners. Sabrina had a habit of parading her life online. Weekend spa retreats, front-row concert seats, rooftop brunches with friends who all seemed to carry the same designer handbags. She'd post from infinity pools and private lounges, all tagged with number blessed and number living my best life. Meanwhile, I was upstairs folding laundry, making sure there was milk in the fridge, covering the surprise gaps when their fun money ran dry. She never posted those moments. The erosion wasn't sudden. It was a slow tide wearing me down. A casual remark about how I should get out more when she knew she'd arranged things so I couldn't. A laugh over my old lady clothes when I wore the same cardigan I'd had for years. A pointed look when I bought something for myself. Never expensive, never frivolous, but still somehow too much in her eyes. Each little cut was easy to dismiss on its own, but together they left me feeling like a guest in my own life. Like everything I had to offer was a given, and everything I needed was an imposition. And yet, I stayed. Because that's what you do when you've convinced yourself that family comes first. You remind yourself of the money you gave when they needed it, of the sacrifices you made without complaint. You tell yourself they'll remember, that deep down they know. But sitting in that living room with the sting of Sabrina's slap still fresh, I realized they hadn't forgotten at all. They'd simply decided it was their due. Everything I had given them was no longer a gift. It was an expectation. And the only thing left for them to take was whatever I hadn't already handed over. "I'll pack my things," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. The room was silent for a heartbeat, and for a brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe Evan would soften, tell me to sit back down, that we could work this out. Instead, he leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on me with a flatness I'd never seen before. "And I'll need your savings," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "All of it," he continued, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "Compensation for everything we've done for you. Rent, food, the roof over your head. You've lived here for 2 years without paying your fair share." I almost laughed, the sound catching in my throat. "My fair share? I've given you $12,000 a year in rent, plus groceries, plus bills, which barely covers half of what you've cost us," Sabrina cut in. She was still standing, arms crossed, face set in a triumphant mask, as if this was a negotiation she'd already won. "So yes, your savings. Call it a parting gift." I wanted to tell them no. I wanted to throw every sacrifice I'd made back in their faces. But in that moment, I was too tired to fight, too stunned by how easily they'd rewritten the story of my presence in their home from support to burden. My chest felt tight, my legs heavy, but I turned without another word and walked toward the hallway. Evan didn't call after me. Sabrina didn't move to stop me. The upstairs room they'd given me was barely big enough for a bed, a dresser, and a small desk. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the space that had been mine, realizing how little of my life was actually in it. The bulk of my possessions, furniture, old keepsakes, had gone into storage when I moved in. I hadn't needed much here, and over time, I'd stopped buying things for myself altogether. I pulled my old suitcases from under the bed, the same ones I'd used when I'd traveled for the agency. One for clothes, one for essentials. I folded blouses, jeans, a couple of dresses, my sturdy walking shoes. Every item I packed reminded me of some version of myself I hadn't been in years. Someone who planned trips for herself instead of other people, who chose what she wore without thinking how Sabrina might judge it. The third case was a cardboard box, the kind you get at the grocery store when you don't want to pay for a bin. Into it went the photo albums, pages and pages of Evan growing up, birthday cakes and scraped knees, high school dances and the day he graduated college. There were pictures of me, too, always in the background, smiling, tired, proud. Looking at them, I felt a sharp ache I couldn't quite name. My life, boiled down to what fit in an old Honda Civic. Downstairs, I could hear Sabrina in the kitchen, her voice pitched high and animated. She was on the phone. "Yes, Mom, she finally agreed to move out. I know. I'm so relieved. We'll have the house to ourselves again. And..." Her tone shifted into the smug, conspiratorial register she used when she thought she was being clever. Get this. She even offered to help pay for our anniversary cruise. Isn't that generous? I mean, she didn't say it outright, but I can tell she's going to. It's the least she can do after everything we've done for her. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, gripping the box so tightly the cardboard creaked. It was one thing to watch them strip away my dignity in private. It was another to hear her rewrite the story in real time for an audience, painting herself as the magnanimous hostess and me as the ungrateful dependent who was now making amends. My cheek still burned faintly where she'd slapped me, but this felt worse. This twisting of truth into something that could be passed around at family gatherings and posted on Facebook as a victory. Evan was nowhere to be seen, probably in his home office, avoiding me, avoiding this entire scene. That was his specialty: stand with Sabrina when it counted, disappear when it was time to face the fallout. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. Each step felt like I was moving further away from the life I'd thought I was building here. A life with family close, with shared meals and mutual care. That illusion was gone now, shattered in a single conversation. At the bottom of the stairs, I set my things by the front door. My keys to the house sat on the table beside them. I picked them up, feeling their weight for a moment before placing them on top of the box. From the kitchen, Sabrina's laughter rang out, bright and hollow. Yes, Mom. We'll be sipping champagne on the deck in no time. She's finally doing something useful. I didn't wait to hear more. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye, the evening air cool against my skin. Somewhere behind me, I imagined Sabrina toasting herself with a glass of wine, certain she'd just won something. She didn't know yet that the game was far from over. I left at dusk, the sky bruised purple and orange, my 2 suitcases and the box of photo albums wedged into the back seat of my Honda. The house was behind me now, shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. I didn't have a plan, not really. I just drove, letting the roads I'd known for decades carry me somewhere that wasn't there. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I'd ended up by the harbor, a place I'd always found comforting in my travel agent days, when ships represented possibility instead of distance. I parked facing the water, the kind of spot where the sodium lamps barely reached, and the only company was the occasional gull cutting across the fading light. The air smelled of salt and diesel, sharp and clean at the same time. Somewhere in the distance, a cruise ship horn echoed, deep and resonant, rolling across the water like a slow heartbeat. I sat there with my hands on the wheel long after the engine had cooled, listening to the creak of mooring ropes and the slap of small waves against the pier. When I finally reclined the seat, I told myself it would just be for the night. One night in the car while I figured out my next step. But one night became 2. The first night, the cold surprised me. The kind that seeps in through the glass and makes your bones ache. I tried to wrap my coat tighter around me, but my knees still knocked together. I slept in bursts, waking at every sound. The hum of a truck's engine as it passed, the muffled shouts of dock workers, the faint clang of metal against metal as cargo was moved. The second night was worse, not because it was colder, but because the reality had settled in. I was a 63-year-old widow, sleeping in the front seat of a car I'd had since Evan graduated high school. Everything I owned was within arm's reach. My room was now a space barely wider than my shoulders. I'd always told myself I was careful with money because I was preparing for a rainy day. Turns out the rainy day had come, and I was parked in it. I had $94,000 in my savings account. Not a fortune, but enough that I shouldn't have been here, cradling a thermos of coffee from the all-night diner down the street just to keep my hands warm. Enough that I could have rented a small apartment months ago instead of staying in that house, tiptoeing around Sabrina's moods, accepting her condescension as if it were part of the rent agreement. I told myself I was being practical, that living with them kept my expenses low so I could save more for emergencies. But sitting there, Watching the lights of the ships glitter across the dark water, I realized that wasn't the truth at all. I hadn't been saving for emergencies. I'd been hoarding out of guilt, hoarding the only thing I thought made me valuable to my son. Every deposit into that account had been like stacking another brick in a prison I'd built myself. I thought if I kept giving, kept being useful, they'd keep me close. They'd see me as part of their family. Instead, I'd made it easy for them to take without thinking twice. My contributions became invisible because they were constant. The money that once could have bought me freedom had turned into the chain that kept me tethered to people who didn't see me as a mother, or even as a person, just as a resource. The harbor was quiet in the hours before dawn. The water was black glass, broken only by the slow churn of a departing vessel. I watched it move away, lights fading into the distance, and wondered if the people on board had any idea how lucky they were. Warm beds, hot meals, an itinerary that promised sun and adventure. All bought and paid for, their only worry whether the weather would cooperate for the next port. I thought about Sabrina holding that brochure, her manicured nail tapping at the words "Owner's Suite," like she was entitled to it. I thought about Evan looking at me as if I were just another bill to be paid. And then I thought about the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into the narrow corner of their lives they'd allowed me to occupy. By the end of the second night, I knew I couldn't do this much longer. My body ached from the cramped sleeping position, and my pride, what was left of it, was fraying fast. But there was also a spark there, faint but persistent. The part of me that had once built a business from scratch, that had navigated clients through missed flights and lost luggage without losing my cool, was whispering that this wasn't the end of my story. I stared out at the cruise ships docked in the harbor, their white hulls glowing in the early morning light. Somewhere inside those walls were staterooms I used to book for clients, dining rooms I used to describe in glossy detail. I used to sell people on the idea that a cruise could change their perspective, give them a new sense of possibility. I hadn't believed it for myself in a long time. But as I sat there, the horn of another departing ship rolling low over the water, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. By the third morning, the inside of my car smelled faintly of stale coffee and cold air. My back ached from the way I'd been sleeping, one leg bent awkwardly over the console, the other twisted under me. I told myself I'd get out for a walk, stretch my legs, maybe find a cheap breakfast somewhere that didn't involve another paper cup. The marina was already awake, gulls wheeling overhead, their cries sharp against the steady slap of water against the pilings. Dock workers moved in practiced rhythm, hauling supplies, checking lines, shouting to one another in short bursts over the thrum of engines. I followed the boardwalk past small fishing boats and sleek yachts, the smell of salt air and diesel wrapping around me. It should have made me feel out of place. This was a space for people with destinations and plans, not for someone living out of an aging Honda, but instead, it felt strangely familiar. Back in my travel agency days, I'd spent countless hours arranging cruises for clients, poring over itineraries and stateroom layouts, matching people with ships that suited their personalities. I used to know the names of captains and which lines had the best staff. I thought I'd left all that behind. And then I saw him. He was standing on the deck of a ship docked just ahead, a tall man in a crisp white uniform, silver hair catching the morning light. Even after all these years, I knew that profile. The straight posture, the way he kept one hand resting lightly on the rail as if it were part of him. My steps slowed, my breath catching. Adrian Cole. We'd worked together for 2 years back when my agency specialized in high-end cruises. He'd been a young officer then, just starting his rise through the ranks, always the one who went the extra mile for a guest. We'd kept in touch for a while after he moved on. but life pulled us in different directions. I hadn't seen him in over 3 decades. I stood there, debating whether to turn away before he noticed me. I must have looked awful. My hair pulled back in a limp ponytail. The same sweater I'd been wearing for days. Shoes scuffed from years of wear. But before I could decide, he looked down toward the dock, and our eyes met. The recognition was instant. His face broke into a wide smile, the kind that lit up his whole expression. He lifted a hand in a wave, and before I knew it, he was striding toward the gangway, moving with that same purposeful energy I remembered. "Clara Whitfield," he called, and hearing my name in his voice after all this time brought a lump to my throat. "Adrian Cole," I said, and my voice wavered just enough to betray how much the moment meant. When he reached me, he didn't hesitate, just pulled me into a hug that was warm and steady, nothing like the stiff, transactional embraces I'd grown used to. My God, it's been what, 40 years? Almost, I said. Since the convention in Miami, you'd just been offered your first captaincy. He laughed, the sound easy and genuine. And you'd just booked that record-breaking group cruise. I still tell people about how you handled that client who wanted her own piano in the suite. The memories rushed back, late nights on the phone with suppliers, Adrian and I swapping notes on how to calm demanding passengers, celebrating little victories over drinks. Back then, I'd felt capable, respected. I hadn't realized until this moment how much I missed that version of myself. He stepped back, studying me with a faint crease between his brows. "What brings you down here? You don't live in the Harbor District." I hesitated. "How do you explain that you're here because you have nowhere else to go? That your own son has thrown you out?" I settled on the simplest truth. I needed a change of scenery. He didn't press, just gestured toward the ship behind him. "Come aboard. We can catch up properly over coffee." "Oh, Adrian, I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," he said firmly. "I'm the captain. I can invite whoever I like." His smile softened. "And I'd like to invite an old friend who looks like she could use a break." Something in me eased then, like a knot loosening. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with that kind of warmth. No expectation attached, no ledger being balanced. I followed him up the gangway, the hum of the ship under my feet, the scent of polished wood and clean sea air surrounding us. The interior gleamed, all brass accents and soft lighting, a quiet luxury that made me think of the brochures I used to hand out to clients. As we stepped into his quarters, a space larger than my entire apartment had been years ago, he moved easily around the small kitchen, pulling mugs from a cabinet. "Still take it black?" he asked. I smiled, surprised he remembered. "Always." He handed me the cup, the coffee rich and strong, and we settled into a pair of chairs by the window. Outside, the harbor stretched wide, ships rocking gently at their moorings. For the first time in days, I felt like I was somewhere I belonged. Not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. And as Adrian began asking about my life, genuinely listening, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in years. The faint, cautious flicker of hope. The coffee was hot, rich, and far better than anything I'd sipped in days. Adrian sat across from me in the captain's quarters, sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the harbor glinting like glass. He'd changed into a soft blue sweater, his uniform jacket draped over the back of a chair. It made the space feel less formal, like we were just two old friends catching up, though the reality of our surroundings, a captain's private quarters on a luxury ship, was impossible to ignore. "So," he said, leaning back slightly, "what really brought you here, Clara? And don't give me that change of scenery line." His tone was gentle, but unyielding. "I've known you long enough to know when you're dodging." I stared into my cup for a long moment. It would have been easier to lie, to give him some half-truth about wanting to be near the water. But there was something in the way he looked at me, steady, patient, that made me feel like I didn't have to pretend. It's a long story, I said finally. I've got time, he replied. We don't sail until tomorrow night. So I told him. I started with the brochure, Sabrina standing in Evan's living room, demanding a $55,000 Mediterranean cruise as if she were asking for a loaf of bread. I told him about saying no, about the silence that followed, about the slap that landed so hard my cheek burned for hours. I described Evan's nod, his flat voice when he told me he'd squeeze every cent out of me if he had to. Adrian didn't interrupt. His hands stayed folded in his lap, but I saw his jaw tighten. I went on. Selling my travel agency years ago to help Evan with his doomed business. Buying them a car, covering part of their house down payment. How I'd paid them rent, groceries, bills, all the while being treated as though my contributions were meaningless. How Sabrina had quietly isolated me from my friends until they stopped calling. When I got to the part about packing my life into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of photo albums, I could feel my throat tightening. I told him about hearing Sabrina on the phone, bragging to her mother that I'd agreed to help pay for their cruise as a parting gift. By the time I finished, the coffee in my cup was cold. I felt wrung out, like I'd emptied more than just words into the space between us. Adrian's voice was low but firm. Clara, that's textbook elder abuse. I blinked. Elder abuse. No, I mean, they didn't. They financially exploited you, he said, cutting me off without raising his voice. They isolated you from your support network, and when you stopped complying, they made you homeless. That's not just cruel. It's abuse. Hearing the words from him hit differently. I'd been framing it as family conflict, as a situation that had simply gotten out of hand. Naming it made it real in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel. I managed a small, bitter laugh. You always did have a way of cutting through the polite version of things. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on mine. I also remember you were the best at solving problems. Back at the agency, you could handle a dozen panicked clients at once, calm them down, and still get their issues resolved before lunch. You have a talent most people in this industry would kill for. That was a long time ago, I said quietly. Skills like yours don't expire, he countered. You know hospitality inside and out. You know how to work with people, even difficult ones. And you know the value of making someone feel seen and valued. That's rarer than you think. I shook my head slightly. Adrian, I haven't run a business in years. I don't know the first thing about how these ships operate now. Everything's changed. Not everything, he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. And the things that have? I can teach you. You'd have the best trainer in the business. He paused, studying my reaction. What would you say if I offered you a senior guest services management role here? We're looking for someone to oversee guest experience fleet-wide. You'd train with me, get up to speed, and... His voice softened. I'd make you a partner, Clara. Ownership stake. A real one. The words hung in the air between us, too big to take in all at once. I let out a short breath. A partner? Adrian? I don't have that kind of money to buy in. He waved a hand. You have enough. Use what you didn't give them for their cruise. That's your buy-in. I'll match it in kind. I'm not just offering a job, Clara. I'm offering you a way out. A way back to yourself. I stared at him, feeling the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Why? I asked. Why me? He leaned back, his gaze drifting for a moment toward the window. Because I remember the woman who could turn a furious client into a loyal one with a single phone call. Because I know you'd treat every guest like they mattered. And because... His eyes met mine again, steady and warm. I never stopped thinking of you as someone I wanted in my corner. I looked down at my hands, the faint tremor in them. It's a lot to take in. Take your time, he said, his voice gentle again. We sail tomorrow. Think about what you want your life to look like from here on out. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, I thought about an answer that wasn't just survival. 2 days after Adrian's offer, I unlocked the door to a company apartment that overlooked the harbor. It was a one-bedroom with white walls, polished wood floors, and a balcony just wide enough for a small table and 2 chairs. Compared to the cramped upstairs room in Evan's house, or worse, the front seat of my Honda, it felt like a palace. My suitcases sat in the center of the living room like survivors from another life. I didn't have much to unpack, but that suited me fine. This place felt like a blank page, and for the first time in years, I was ready to start writing something new. The next morning, Adrian had me at the cruise line's headquarters by 8 sharp. Morrison and Cole Maritime occupied a glass-fronted building just across from the docks, the kind of place where sunlight bounced off every surface and the air smelled faintly of salt and expensive coffee. You're going to shadow different departments, Adrian explained as we stepped into a bright conference room. Guest relations, food and beverage, entertainment, finance. You'll see how all the moving parts fit together. My first week was spent in guest relations, where the phones rang constantly and the staff fielded everything from lost luggage claims to dinner seating disputes. It was chaotic, but familiar. I found myself falling back into old habits, listening carefully, repeating the concern to show I understood, and offering solutions without making promises I couldn't keep. By day 3, one of the managers had jokingly asked if I'd consider staying on permanently in her department. The second week, Adrian moved me into operations. Here, the work was less about soothing voices and more about numbers, budgets for onboard services, supply chain logistics, staffing schedules. The spreadsheets looked intimidating at first, but the principles weren't so different from running my agency. You had a finite budget, competing needs, and the constant challenge of delivering more than what was promised. You think like a guest and like an operator? The finance director told me one afternoon. That's rare. Staff training came next. I spent mornings in workshops with new hires, housekeepers, waitstaff, deckhands, watching how they were prepared for the demands of life at sea. Afternoons, I shadowed senior staff in conflict resolution sessions, observing how small issues could balloon if not handled with care. It struck me how much of cruise management was about relationships, not just with guests, but within the crew. A happy, respected staff meant better service, fewer complaints, smoother operations. By the 4th week, I was starting to see how my decades in travel had given me a unique advantage. I'd spent years matching people to experiences, solving problems in real time, keeping calm when things went sideways. On a ship, those skills translated directly. Every day brought new personalities, unexpected challenges, and the need to make hundreds of small decisions that shaped someone's experience. Adrian checked in often, sometimes over quick lunches in the company cafeteria, sometimes in the quiet of his office where the view of the water was framed by dark wood and brass fittings. "You're doing more than I hoped," he said one afternoon, sliding a folder across his desk toward me. Inside were legal documents, neatly clipped and tabbed. "This makes it official. You're now a 25% owner of Morrison and Cole Maritime." I stared at the papers, then at him. "Adrian, I thought we'd wait." "We could," he said, "but I'd rather you have a real stake in this now. Use the $55,000 you didn't hand over to Sabrina. Let it work for you instead of disappearing into her Instagram feed. It felt strange, almost unreal, to think that the same money Sabrina had tried to wrench out of me for her cruise was now buying me ownership in an actual cruise line. I signed where he indicated, my hand steady despite the enormity of the moment. That evening, I walked back to my apartment with the papers tucked safely in my bag. From the balcony, I could see the lights of the ships at dock, their reflections shimmering on the black water. For so long, my life had been about giving, money, time, energy, until there was almost nothing left for myself. Now, for the first time in years, what I gave was building something I could stand on. The training continued for another month, each day adding another layer to my understanding of the business. I learned the intricacies of port negotiations, how weather changes could ripple through an itinerary, the importance of redundancy in onboard systems. I learned the names of crew members, their stories, their quirks, and in return, they began to greet me not as a visitor, but as part of the team. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to molten gold, Adrian joined me on the balcony. He set down 2 glasses of wine and leaned on the railing beside me. "Do you realize," he said, "that in a matter of weeks you've gone from sleeping in your car to co-owning a company?" I laughed, the sound surprising even to me. "It feels like stepping into someone else's life." "No," he said, his gaze steady on mine. "It's your life. You just took it back." The ships below gave a low rolling horn blast, as if to underscore his point. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like I was floating along. I felt like I was steering. It had been nearly 6 weeks since I'd moved into the company apartment and started training. My days were a whirlwind of meetings, ship inspections, and strategy sessions, but I felt more energized than I had in years. I was learning, contributing, and for the first time in a long time, building something that was mine. Morrison and Cole Maritime wasn't just a company anymore. It was a lifeline. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was in Adrian's office reviewing guest satisfaction reports when he glanced at his phone and chuckled under his breath. "You're not going to believe this," he said, scrolling through something. I looked up from the reports. "What's that tone? That's your brace yourself tone." He turned the screen toward me. It was an internal booking notification, the kind I'd learned to skim for details: cabin type, payment status, special requests. But my eyes froze on the names: Mr. and Mrs. Evan Whitfield. It was like reading a line in a book where you already know the ending, but still feel the punch. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Nope," Adrian replied. "They've booked a luxury suite on the Ocean Pearl for our upcoming 21-day Mediterranean cruise. Your Mediterranean cruise," he added pointedly. I blinked at him. "They can't possibly afford that." "Probably not," he agreed. "Payments pending final clearance. Looks like they put the deposit on a credit card and will pay the rest when the balance is due." My mind spun. The Ocean Pearl was one of our crown jewels, elegant, spacious, the kind of ship that drew serious travelers and big spenders. A luxury suite for that itinerary wasn't far from the $55,000 cruise Sabrina had demanded from me just months ago. And now, without my money, they were booking it anyway. I pictured Sabrina, probably telling friends she deserved this trip, spinning some story about how they'd landed a great deal. Evan would follow her lead, even if it meant sinking deeper into debt. Adrian leaned back in his chair, watching me closely. "So, what do you want to do about it?" I thought for a moment. The old me would have confronted them immediately, called, demanded answers, lectured them about financial responsibility. But the old me also would have been sucked right back into their problems, pulled into the role of fixer. Instead, I felt something else: a quiet, calculating calm. "When does the Ocean Pearl sail?" I asked. 3 weeks, Adrian said. I nodded slowly. And who's listed as vice president of guest services for that voyage? Technically? He raised an eyebrow. You are. The idea formed in my mind with such clarity it almost startled me. Then I'll be on board, I said, in uniform, doing my job, and I won't tell them a thing until the moment is right. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face. I like the way you think. Keeping my identity from them wasn't about deception for the sake of cruelty. It was about control. For years, they'd held the upper hand, manipulating the narrative, deciding what I knew and when I knew it. This time, I would be the one holding the cards. They would walk onto that ship thinking I was still the woman they'd thrown out, the one they'd belittled and discarded. And I would be there, not as their mother or their target, but as a senior executive on the vessel they'd stretched themselves to afford. For the next few weeks, I worked with the Ocean Pearls crew remotely, preparing for my role on board. I studied the passenger list, noting VIPs, special requests, and potential high-maintenance guests. Evan and Sabrina were flagged for premium suite service, which meant they'd expect nothing less than perfection. That was fine. I'd see to it personally. Adrian handled the logistics. Your cabin will be on the same deck as the senior officers, he told me one afternoon. Discreet location, private access. You'll have full oversight of guest services for the voyage, which means every interaction with them will run through you if you choose. I almost laughed. So I'm their concierge in a way? Exactly, he said, but with authority. The thought gave me a thrill I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't about petty revenge. It was about standing in the place they'd never expected me to reach. I'd been painted as a burden, an afterthought, someone whose value was measured only in dollars given to them. Soon they'd see me as something else entirely. As the sailing date approached, I had my uniform tailored, a crisp navy blazer with the Morrison and Cole emblem embroidered on the pocket, name badge polished until it caught the light. Seeing Clara Whitfield, Vice President Guest Services in clean lettering, felt like the final proof that I was no longer the woman they'd tried to reduce me to. On the eve of embarkation, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the Ocean Pearl dock in the harbor. Its lights sparkled against the dark water, the hull gleaming under the dock lamps. Somewhere on the other side of the city, Evan and Sabrina were packing for a trip they couldn't truly afford, ready to step into a world they thought was theirs by right. I sipped my tea and let the cool night air wash over me. In less than 24 hours, they'd walk up that gangway, smiling for photos, ready to demand the best from everyone around them. They would have no idea that the person ensuring their perfect cruise was the same woman they'd driven away. And I would be ready. The morning of embarkation was a study in organized chaos. Luggage carts rattling over the dock, porters shouting cabin numbers, the low hum of thousands of excited voices blending with the occasional blast of the Ocean Pearl's horn. I stood just inside the main atrium, the sunlight pouring through the glass ceiling, catching the gold thread of the Morrison and Cole emblem on my crisp navy blazer. My name badge gleamed. Clara Cole, Vice President, Guest Services. Seeing the name still sent a quiet jolt through me, as if each glance confirmed that this was no dream. I was ostensibly stationed there to observe the check-in process, noting any bottlenecks or guest complaints for my post-boarding report. But in truth, I was waiting for one arrival in particular. It didn't take long. Sabrina appeared first, sweeping into the atrium in a flowing designer sundress the color of champagne, a wide-brimmed hat perched perfectly atop her glossy hair. Behind her trailed two porters struggling under the weight of her matching set of monogrammed luggage. She didn't thank them, of course, just barked instructions about which bags were fragile and should be handled with care. Evan followed a step behind, looking vaguely harried, his phone in one hand, his other carrying a single overnight bag. He looked around with the same half-dazed awe I'd seen in countless first-time cruise passengers, but there was tension in his jaw. I stayed just out of sight as they reached the front desk, where Maria, our head of guest services, greeted them with her professional warmth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. I see you're booked in Suite 6142. "That's wrong," Sabrina said immediately, leaning forward over the counter. "We booked a premium balcony suite. This says deluxe balcony." Her tone was edged with disbelief, like Maria had just told her the ship was sailing without them. Maria checked her screen, fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. "According to your booking, this is the correct category and cabin assignment." "That can't be right," Sabrina snapped. "We were promised top-tier accommodations. This is our anniversary, for God's sake. Do you think I'm going to spend it in a lesser suite?" "I'm afraid that's the only cabin confirmed under your reservation," Maria said evenly. "There are higher-tier suites available for an upgrade fee." "I'm not paying more," Sabrina cut in, turning to Evan. "Tell her." Evan shifted uncomfortably. "We can't afford to pay more right now." Her eyes flashed. "We're not staying there. Fix it." I chose that moment to step forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor. "Perhaps I can help," I said, letting my voice carry the practiced calm I'd honed over decades in travel. Maria looked relieved. "Vice President Cole, this is Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. They're hoping to change cabins." Sabrina turned to me, her expression softening slightly now that someone with authority was involved. She didn't recognize me, not a flicker of suspicion. To her, I was just another ship's officer who might solve her problem. "Yes, thank goodness. We were promised a premium suite, and somehow there's been a mix-up. I'd like it corrected immediately." I offered a pleasant smile. "Of course. Let me review your file." From behind the desk, I glanced at the booking on the screen. Paid in full, though just barely. Final payment processed after 2 failed card attempts. I took my time before looking back at them. "I do have one premium suite that just became available due to a last-minute cancellation. Normally there would be an upgrade fee, but—" I paused, letting her lean in expectantly. "As a courtesy for your anniversary, we can waive the fee." Sabrina's face lit up with triumph. "Perfect. That's more like it." "There is," I added smoothly, "one condition. This suite includes dedicated concierge service, and I personally oversee those guests. It means I'll be your point of contact for anything you need. Dining arrangements, shore excursions, special requests. You'll work directly with me throughout your voyage." "Even better," she said without hesitation. "We appreciate excellent service." Evan just nodded, still looking as if he'd rather be anywhere but the center of her demands. I printed their new key cards and handed them to Maria, who presented them with a polite smile. "Suite 1203, starboard side. I think you'll find it more than satisfactory." Sabrina took the keys like they were a prize she'd earned through sheer force of will. "See?" she murmured to Evan as they turned toward the elevators. "You just have to talk to the right people." I watched them go, noting the way she walked with her chin high, as if she'd conquered some personal injustice. Evan trailed behind, carrying her handbag now in addition to his own bag. Neither of them looked back. Maria glanced at me once they were out of earshot. "That was generous," she murmured. "Generous," I agreed, though my smile carried an edge only I understood. They'll get exactly the level of service they deserve. As I made a note in their file, I felt a strange, steady satisfaction. The pieces were in place. They'd arrived thinking they could command and take without consequence. For the next 3 weeks, they'd be living in a world where I set the terms, and this time, I wouldn't be playing the role they expected. By the 4th night at sea, I'd watched Sabrina burn through most of the goodwill our crew extended to guests. The staff had been whispering about her since embarkation, how she clicked her fingers for service, made excessive demands, and left a trail of sharp comments wherever she went. I'd instructed my team to keep calm, to treat her as they would any other guest. But I knew a moment was coming when patience alone wouldn't suffice. That moment arrived in the dining room. It was our captain's gala dinner, the kind of evening where the chandeliers above the Ocean Pearl's grand dining hall glimmered like captured stars, and the sea's faint rocking made wine glasses sway in a delicate rhythm. Guests wore evening gowns and tuxedos, waiters moved with choreographed precision, and a string quartet filled the air with quiet elegance. I was making my rounds when I heard Sabrina's voice, sharp, cutting, cut through the genteel murmur like a snapped violin string. "This is wrong," she said, holding up a plate as if it were a biohazard. "I ordered a simple salad, no olives, no dressing, and look at this, it's drenched. Honestly, how difficult is it to follow instructions?" The young waitress, Elena, stood frozen beside her, cheeks flushing crimson. She was new, barely 3 weeks into her first contract, and I could see the way her hands trembled as she reached for the plate. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, Don't bother apologizing," Sabrina cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "If you can't get a salad right, maybe you shouldn't be here." The tables nearest hers had gone quiet. Forks paused midair. Evan sat across from her, shoulders tight, eyes darting to the other diners. But he said nothing. I walked forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor. "Is there a problem here?" My voice was calm, even, the kind of tone that draws attention without raising itself. Sabrina turned, ready to unleash the same disdain on me. "Yes, your staff can't follow basic instructions. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if something about my face tugged at a thread in her memory. I glanced at Elena. "Thank you, Elena. I'll take it from here. Please check in with the kitchen." She gave me a quick, grateful nod and escaped toward the swinging doors. Now I faced Sabrina fully. "I understand you didn't receive the salad exactly as you requested. That's regrettable, and we'll address it. But I must remind you, our staff are here to serve you, not to be demeaned in front of other guests." Her brows shot up. "Excuse me? I'm a paying customer." "And as Vice President of Guest Services," I said, my voice steady as steel beneath velvet, "I'm responsible for ensuring every guest has an exceptional experience. That includes the guest you just insulted." A ripple of murmurs moved through the nearby tables. I felt Evan's gaze lock on me then. Really look at me. His eyes widened, his lips parting. "Mom?" The word left him in a half-whisper, as if saying it too loud might confirm it. I turned my eyes to him at last. "Hello, Evan. Hello, Sabrina. Enjoying your cruise?" It was as if the air shifted in the room. Sabrina's face drained of color, then flushed so quickly it was like watching the tide change in fast motion. She started, but no words followed. Evan leaned back in his chair, eyes darting to the guests around them. He knew the scene had already captured an audience. The other passengers weren't even pretending to ignore it now. I let the silence stretch, measured and deliberate. "I'm pleased you're here," I continued. "It gives me the chance to ensure you receive the service you deserve." I let that hang, an ambiguous promise, one that would keep them guessing which way the wind would blow. Sabrina's fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth. "We didn't know." "No," I said softly. "You didn't. But now you do." For the first time since boarding, Sabrina looked unsettled in a way that went deeper than irritation. This wasn't a restaurant mishap she could bluster through. This was a shift in the balance she'd taken for granted. Evan swallowed, his voice low. "Can we talk privately?" "We will," I said. But not tonight. Tonight, I'd suggest you both enjoy your meal. The kitchen will send a fresh salad. And for the record, Elena is one of our most promising new hires. I expect you to treat her with respect. I turned then, my exit as calm as my entrance, feeling the weight of every watching eye. Behind me, I heard the soft scrape of silverware being set down, conversations resuming in cautious murmurs. The message had been sent, not just to them, but to anyone else paying attention. Sabrina's power was in her voice, her ability to embarrass and dominate. Tonight, I'd taken that voice and redirected it back to her. And for the first time in years, she had no answer. The Ocean Pearls Theater glittered under stage lights, the kind of gold and crimson glow that made even the most jaded passengers lean forward with anticipation. The Welcome Aboard show was tradition, a chance for the captain to greet the guests, the entertainment team to dazzle them with a preview of the week ahead, and the senior officers to take a bow. I'd been part of a dozen of these in my training weeks, always standing discreetly in the wings. Tonight, Adrian had insisted I stand center stage beside him. From my vantage point just behind the curtain, I could see Evan and Sabrina in the audience, about 10 rows back. Sabrina had dressed in another designer gown, her shoulders stiff, her expression carefully neutral. Evan looked restless, checking his watch as if the show were an inconvenience. They had no idea what was coming. The music swelled, a lively medley from the ship's band, and Adrian strode into the spotlight, his white captain's uniform immaculate. The applause was instant, warm, and genuine. He had that charisma some men are born with, a presence that filled the space without effort. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, voice carrying easily over the theater. "Welcome aboard the Ocean Pearl. Whether you're joining us for the first time or are part of our family of returning guests, we're honored to have you here for our Mediterranean voyage." The crowd cheered, a few whistles cutting through the clapping. Adrian continued with the usual introductions: chief engineer, head chef, cruise director, all stepping forward for their applause before retreating backstage. My turn was approaching, and I could feel a quiet pulse in my chest. Not nerves exactly, but a readiness, like the moment before a wave breaks. "And now," Adrian said, letting the moment hang just long enough to draw every eye, "I want to introduce someone very special. Many of you may have already met her in passing these last few weeks, but tonight I have the pleasure of sharing the truth about her role on this ship." He turned toward the wings and extended a hand. I stepped out into the light, my navy blazer crisp, my name badge catching the gleam. Clara Cole, Vice President, Guest Services. The applause was polite at first, the kind people give when they aren't sure who they're clapping for. "This," Adrian said, placing a hand on my back, "is Clara Cole, our Vice President of Guest Services and a co-owner of the Ocean Pearl." The applause grew louder, passengers smiling, some leaning in to get a better look. I allowed a small, gracious smile, scanning the crowd just long enough for my gaze to cross Evans. His expression froze mid-breath, and even at this distance I could see the color drain from his face. Sabrina's head snapped toward him, her mouth parting slightly before she looked back at me, her fingers drumming a frantic rhythm against her gown. Adrian wasn't done. "She is also," he said, lowering his tone just enough to make the words intimate, "my fiancée." The theater erupted into cheers and whistles. Passengers clapped enthusiastically, some rising to their feet. Cameras flashed from smartphones, and someone near the front shouted, "Congratulations!" Out there in row 10, Evan sat rigid, his hands clasped so tightly, I wondered if he could still feel his fingers. Sabrina shifted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her eyes fixed on the stage but unfocused. Whatever composure she'd walked in with was unraveling thread by thread. "And so," Adrian went on. You can rest assured that our guest services department is led by a woman who understands the art of hospitality better than anyone I've ever known. Clara built her career helping travelers create memories they'd carry for a lifetime. Now she's here to make sure your voyage is exactly what you've dreamed. The applause rolled on, but beneath the warmth of the audience, I could feel the icy silence from my son's direction. It was the kind of silence that said more than words could. This wasn't just a public revelation. It was a shift in the power dynamic they'd relied on for years. I wasn't the dependent widow in their spare bedroom anymore. I was a woman with her own title, her own stake in a thriving business, and a partner who valued me. Adrian leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You're glowing," he murmured. I stepped forward, taking the microphone he offered. "Thank you, everyone. It's a privilege to be here, and I look forward to making this journey unforgettable for all of you." My voice was steady, warm, unshaken. When we left the stage, the applause still echoed behind us. I didn't need to look back to know Evan and Sabrina were already strategizing. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what they might do next. The ocean stretched endlessly around us, and I knew this time I had the helm. The theater lobby was still buzzing from the show, passengers spilling out into the wide carpeted space, chattering about the cruise itinerary and the captain's announcement. The scent of champagne from the complimentary glasses lingered in the air. I had just stepped to one side, speaking briefly with a couple from Barcelona about dinner reservations, when I saw them, Evan and Sabrina, cutting through the crowd toward me. Sabrina's walk was different now. Gone was the haughty sway and the lifted chin. Her steps were sharp, urgent. Evan trailed half a pace behind her, his jaw tight. They looked less like the golden couple who had strutted onto the ship 3 days ago, and more like two people walking into a job interview they weren't prepared for. "Mom," Evan said, his voice low but strained. "We need to talk. Now." I glanced toward Adrian, who was still shaking hands with guests near the theater doors. He gave me a quick nod. He'd seen them coming too. I stepped aside with them into a quieter corner of the lobby, the low hum of conversation from other passengers serving as a strange kind of shield. Sabrina didn't waste time. "We're in trouble," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The mortgage is overdue. Our credit cards are maxed out. She glanced around, lowering her voice further. "We haven't paid for this cruise yet. They're going to bill us before we dock. And if we can't cover it..." Her eyes darted to mine like she was trying to reel me in, just as she always had, with urgency, with the unspoken assumption that I would step in. Evan's tone was sharper. "We need your help. You can do this easily now. You own part of this ship. You can clear this for us." I studied them for a moment, not rushing my reply. I could feel the years of quiet acquiescence in my bones, the endless bending, the way I'd made my own needs small so theirs could take precedence. And now, here they were, standing in front of me as though nothing had changed. "I'm not going to do that," I said finally, my voice even. Sabrina's mouth fell open. "What do you mean you're not?" "I mean," I said, cutting in, "that I've spent years giving. Years of selling my business to help you start yours, buying your car, helping with your house, paying rent every month under your roof, and never once did it make me family in your eyes. And then, when I wouldn't give you what you wanted, you slapped me and threw me out of my home." "That was a mistake," Evan said quickly. Things got heated." "No, Evan," I said softly but firmly. "It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You both made it." Sabrina stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "So you're abandoning us now? When we're about to lose everything?" I met her stare without blinking. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm accepting the reality you created. You pushed me out, and I built a life without you. You made it very clear where I stood, and I've decided not to stand there anymore." Evan's eyes dropped to the carpet. "We're your family," he said, but the words lacked conviction. I shook my head. Family isn't just a word. It's how you treat someone when they have nothing to offer you. Adrian has treated me like family. My colleagues here have treated me like family. They see me, they value me, they protect me. That is family." Sabrina's lips tightened, her gaze flicking toward Adrian in the distance. "So that's it? You're just done with us?" I adjusted my blazer, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being your easy solution. And I'm done believing that my worth is tied to what I can pay for." I took a step back toward the theater doors. "You'll figure something out. You always do. But this time, you'll have to do it without me." They stood frozen, the crowd flowing around them. Passengers laughed, clinked glasses, planned excursions, life moving on while the two of them seemed locked in place. I turned and walked toward Adrian, who met me halfway, his hand warm on my shoulder. The noise of the lobby swelled behind me, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking toward something better. The morning air was sharp with that briny freshness only the open sea can give, and the light over the porch shimmered in pale gold. I stood at the starboard rail, the sun just beginning to warm the metal beneath my hands. Below, on the gangway, a small cluster of disembarking passengers was being escorted toward the terminal. Even from this distance, I could spot them instantly. Evan's stiff shoulders, Sabrina's jerky, impatient movements as she tried to rush the porters along. Their luggage looked different now. No gleaming designer trunks, no glossy matching set. Instead, mismatched cases, the kind you grab in a hurry when there's no time to be particular. I heard from one of the crew that they'd arranged an early disembarkation to handle urgent business matters back home. I didn't need to guess what that meant. I watched without waving. There was no final scene, no last word to be exchanged. They didn't glance back toward the ship. Not at me, not at anything. Perhaps pride kept their eyes forward, or maybe they truly believed there was nothing left here worth looking at. Either way, I let them go without the smallest tug of hesitation. The sea beyond the breakwater was a rich blue, flecked with silver. I leaned into the rail, letting the wind catch my hair, breathing deep. My mind wandered to every moment that had brought me here. The slap in the living room, the 2 nights in my car, the surprise of seeing Adrian at the marina, the quiet afternoons learning the inner workings of a cruise operation. It had been a transformation so fast it almost defied belief, yet so natural it felt as though it had been waiting for me all along. I thought about how easy it had been, for so many years, to fall into the pattern they had set for me. The giver who never asked for return, the convenient safety net, the silent, invisible presence whose role was to make their lives easier. I had told myself it was love, or duty, or simply what family does. But now, with the wind in my face and the deck beneath my feet, I understood the truth. What I'd built was a prison, and I had been both its prisoner and its warden. Down below, Evan was speaking to a crew member, gesturing toward the terminal. His face was drawn, his hair a little untidy. Nothing like the man who had arrived days ago in crisp linen and self-assurance. Sabrina's head was bent over her phone, her brows pinched in frustration. Even their silhouettes looked smaller somehow, as though their importance in my life had physically diminished with every step away from me. I straightened, my hands resting lightly on the polished rail. The ship's PA system crackled to life, announcing morning activities for the remaining guests. Somewhere behind me, I could hear Adrian's laugh, rich, unhurried, as he spoke with a member of the entertainment staff. The hum of the ship, the laughter of passengers, the rhythmic pulse of the sea, It all felt like a heartbeat I had finally fallen into step with. This was not just their departure. It was mine too. Departure from the years of silent endurance, from the belief that my value was tethered to my ability to give until I had nothing left. As the gangway rolled back and the harbor crew began their work, a wave of unexpected calm washed over me. There was no bitterness, no lingering urge to confront them, no imagined speeches left unsaid. Just the quiet, steady knowledge that the chapter of my life where I existed on someone else's terms was closed for good. The ocean pearl's horn sounded, a deep, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through my chest. We were pulling away, turning our bow toward the open water. I kept my eyes on the horizon, the line where sea and sky met in that endless conversation of light. At 63, I whispered to myself, my real life is just beginning. It wasn't just a nice thought, it was a promise. I had work ahead of me, adventures to plan, guests to welcome, and a future that was entirely my own. The kind of life that didn't wait for permission, that didn't shrink to fit the space someone else allowed. Evan and Sabrina had stepped off this ship into their world of overdue bills and mounting debts. I was sailing forward into mine, a world of choice, of freedom, of belonging to people who valued me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. As the harbor shrank behind us and the sun lifted higher, I let the past drift away with the wake, each wave carrying off another piece of the weight I'd been carrying. Ahead lay open seas, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt entirely, unmistakably free. Freedom isn't given, you take it back. I know that now. No one hands you a neat envelope with your independence inside, tied with a ribbon and signed with their blessing. If anything, the people who have learned to live off your sacrifices will fight to the very end to keep you in your place. I had spent years believing my worth was measured in how much I could give. Money, time, comfort, even my dignity. And in the end, the people I gave the most to were the ones who believed they were entitled to it all. Standing on the deck of the Ocean Pearl that morning, the wind catching my hair, I realized that my story didn't start when Sabrina slapped me. It didn't even start when Evan nodded and promised to squeeze every cent out of me. No, my story began the moment I decided that I was done, that I would no longer argue, no longer beg to be treated better, no longer barter for a place in my own family. I walked out with no plan, no safety net, and for the first time in years, my life was mine again. It's strange how fast your perspective changes when you stop giving people the power to define you. I thought that leaving meant losing everything. But the truth is, I left with the only things that mattered: my integrity, my self-respect, my freedom to choose the life I wanted to live. And yes, it was terrifying. Sleeping in my car, wondering what came next, having nothing but 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums to my name. Those moments tested me, but they also stripped away every illusion I'd been living under. When Adrian found me, I didn't realize how much I needed someone to look me in the eye and see more than a burden, more than a mother-in-law to be tolerated. He remembered my competence, my professionalism, my skill. He didn't pity me, he respected me. That respect was the key that unlocked the rest of my life. It's what gave me the courage to take the role on this ship, to buy in as an owner, to stand in front of the very people who had tried to erase me and say without words, "You don't get to define me anymore." And I know I'm not alone in this. That's why I'm telling you, right now, to think about your own life. Has someone been chipping away at your confidence, making you believe you owe them more than you can give? Have you been made to feel like you should be grateful for scraps, even when you've given everything you had? If you have, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. I want this channel to be a place where we share these moments, where we remind each other that taking back your life is not only possible, it's necessary. Maybe your betrayal didn't come in the form of a slap or a demand for a $55,000 cruise. Maybe it came in smaller ways: constant dismissals, subtle insults, being excluded from your own family gatherings. Whatever form it took, I promise you, you're not the only one. And talking about it matters. When we tell the truth about what we've endured, we take away the power of those who thrived in our silence. If this story resonated with you, there are two more waiting for you, right here on this channel. One is about a woman who was told she wasn't welcome at her own daughter's wedding, until she showed up with a letter that changed everything. The other is about a grandmother whose children tried to take her house, only to discover she'd left it to someone they never expected. Both stories carry the same truth. You may lose people, but you will find yourself. And when you do, you'll never go back to being who they wanted you to be. I didn't just get my freedom back. I built a life around it. A life where I wake up each morning to the sound of the sea instead of the sound of someone else's demands. A life where my worth isn't tied to my bank account or my ability to keep the peace. A life where I decide where I go, what I do, and who I share my days with. So tell me, if someone tried to take away your independence, your voice, your place in the world, would you fight to keep it? Or would you walk away and build something better? My advice? Don't wait for them to give you permission. Freedom isn't given. You take it back.